Get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mangat Ing. I am the co-founder and CEO at Anvil. We are extremely excited to bring you three leaders in InsurTech, both founders and C-level executives from Vouch, AgentSync, and Pathpoint. We're also extremely humbled that these companies have entrusted us to help them with their paperwork and data challenges that you inevitably encounter in the insurance industry. I'm confident today's conversation will be very lively and insightful and maybe a little bit entertaining, hopefully. Just a reminder, this event is meant to be interactive. We will be monitoring the chat for Q&A. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the Q&A portion of today's discussion. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Patrick Daniels, an account executive here at Anvil, and the moderator of today's discussion. Patrick.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks everyone for joining us. Happy Mardi Gras. We're extremely humbled to be joined by Jen Knight, CTO of AgentSync, Alex Bargman, CEO of Pathpoint, and John Wallace, Chief Insurance Officer from Vouch Insurance. We're going to do about 35 to 40 minutes of questions and discussions with the panel. And then the last 10, 15 minutes, we'll open it up to the Q&A from the audience. And I will still drive those questions. Today's discussion is an open panel discussion. So to all panelists, do not wait to be called upon. Feel free to join into the conversation. But to kick things off, I'd love to start with kind of introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you found your way into the insurance industry, and a bit about your organization. Alex, would you mind getting things started for us?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Mangat. My name's Alex Bargman, CEO and one of the co-founders of Pathpoint. We're a digital excess and surplus lines brokerage. Like many people, I've heard this from, I got into insurance accidentally, my background's in technology and product management, and happened to be working at a fintech fund that incubated some businesses, and we had a carrier actually approach us and say, hey, we're trying to figure out how to lower some of the transactional costs, some of the friction points in the wholesale distribution channel. We sort of took that idea and ran with it and created Pathpoint.
Awesome. Jen, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about AgentSync?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jen Knight, CTO and co-founder of AgentSync. Similar story, I stumbled into insurance. My partner and co-founder, Niji, was at Zenefits in an operations function and then did licensing compliance work there through their journey. We had worked together before in LinkedIn, working on business application development, and coming out of that experience at Zenefits, you get really excited about the potential of building more modern tooling to manage the workflows that are around onboarding and managing agent obligations, particularly around the regulatory compliance obligations that everybody in the industry faces. So after a lot of dinner conversations and other things, we convinced each other we should start a company and go tackle that. And we've been doing that ever since.
Great, thank you. And John, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about Vouch Insurance and yourself.
Yeah, thank you. John Wallace. So I lead insurance operations for Vouch. I've been with Vouch just over 3 years. Vouch serves the innovation economy, provides commercial property casualty insurance to this segment, and we do that on a direct basis. Vouch set out to provide the right coverage and the right experience for this space. It's a space that has largely been underserved and not well understood by traditional markets and players, and so we are here to fix that and making progress doing so. So excited to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Great, thank you all. I wonder if we could just maybe stretch out some of the last thoughts that you guys had a little bit, in particular around, there's so many, problems and areas that you can address, particularly with insurance. how do you really kind of focus down on a certain area? I know things like horizontal, vertical can be a little bit loaded of words and terminology, but I'm curious to how you guys kind of picked your path in your own segment. Maybe John, we could stick with you for now.
Sure. It's a big question. So
Yeah.
Really for us, we've just seen this play out with the clients we serve, and we talk to them about their experience with the traditional channels of insurance, and it takes them 8 to 12 weeks to get insurance. And oftentimes that process starts with, hey, fill out these, fillable PDF applications. And by the way, type out your address 18 times. Tell us how many employees you have 16 times. For us, first application we got back in 2018, and the broker sends it to us. First questions are, what's your roof type? What's your construction type? Are the sprinklers in your building? All this stuff. And we had 4 laptops at the time. That was it. So, really for us, it's that pain point with the customer. And, I think one of the things we do differently, and by the way, prior to Vouch, I spent 20 plus years in what's best characterized as the traditional commercial P&C space. My observation is that the traditional commercial P&C space starts with the question of how can we make more underwriting profit? At Vouch, we start with the question of how can we deliver a better experience and a better product to the client? Then we'll ask, okay, can we make money at it at the same time? We still have to ask that question, but just that simple orientation of starting with the question of what's best for the end client creates some pretty profound differences in just how we approach the problem and come up with solutions. So big question. I'm just barely getting at the surface of it here, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about your customer first. And Jen, I know you kind of characterize yourself and AgentSync in part of these discussions being a little bit of the odd person out. So I'm wondering how you approach your clientele a little different. You actually work with a lot of the InsurTech organizations. So I'm wondering how you kind of fit into that space and start thinking about your customers.
Yeah, so I actually would echo John in terms of thinking about orientation. And for me, coming into this space, I had not been in insurance. I don't have the 20 years of seeing how it was done. But what I had coming in was a lot of experience of thinking about how people navigate internal applications and what is successful or not successful for that individual. And so when we built AgentSync, we actually initially thought of it as what is the agent experience? So similarly, what is the agent going through? What is the customer going through? Why are they going through it? What is the obligation we need to solve? And then how do we think about improving that experience, which also improves the experience for the licensing administration team? It's a knock on, it's a positive overall, but a reorientation on how do we think about the workflows, and then making sure that we're not getting over our skis and thinking about the workflow in the wrong way. But once we started to think about that orientation piece and think about who's going through it, how they're experiencing it, how do we up level that efficiency, and not think so much about regulatory compliance. It's an incredibly important part of this, but business efficiency for the agent or for the company itself is actually what's really critical. And in being efficient with that, you can have great regulatory compliance outcomes. So we really thought about that of, for every step along the way, what is the person who's going through the flow? I like you said, like 15, we don't want you to fill something out 15 times. You don't want you to have to revisit it over and over. What are the patterns that have been put in place today that are preventing agents from onboarding in a seamless way and are causing a lot of challenges internally to get someone to the right end state? And so that was a fun orientation for me to start with. We also, I think I always say naively, like I did not appreciate in the early days how different insurance is across the industry. So we started looking at what the common problems are and built a product that thought about everyone in that space, life, health, property, casualty. As we're scaling up, we understand that there are different, and there's more than that, right? Obviously personal lines and surplus, and we're extending into those, but there's a common thread of challenge that everyone's facing. And then there are a particular set of nuances for each area that we're going to tackle. But it was really just orienting on, can we talk about that problem statement? Can we think about the agent as the user? And then from improving their workflow, what does that have as a knock-on effect for the rest of the organization?
Great. Alex, I'm wondering if we can maybe expand a little bit on Jen's thought on common threads versus particular to your area. I know Pathpoint specializes quite a bit, so I'm wondering if you've found that as well, the common threads versus particular to your space.
Yeah, I think it's a similar blueprint to John and Jen in that things really started to click for Pathpoint when you anchored on the client experience. And for us, that's independent insurance agents that are looking for a less painful alternative to access the wholesale market. So we're very, we're very focused on the E&S market, and we started this business with a very carrier-centric view of the world. John mentioned underwriting profit. They also care about commissions too and lowering those. And so you can start with that problem of how do you lower commissions in the wholesale channel. They're quite expensive. They're quite high, 20 to 30%, sometimes more on the dollar. But that's just an idea. Like when we really got into it with agents around the country and typically more their back office, their CSRs and account managers, and like really tuned our company culture to appreciate their pain points in getting like a $3,000 policy and it takes like 28 days when it could take 4 hours. Then you start from there and kind of build out. For us, we're not trying to build a better product for just that specific segment. We're trying to leverage existing top tier underwriting organizations and product and help them just digitize the distribution piece, which is bringing it to that user in a very self-service, user-friendly way. And in excess and surplus lines, that's 5 to 10 years behind the admitted commercial lines space. So when we oriented there, it was easier said than done, but that's when things start to click, I think.
It's interesting, and this kind of leads into my next question around insurance being the traditional legacy industry. And it sounds like most of all of your focus has been orientating on the customer. And that's a big differentiator from maybe the traditional aspects of the industry. But kind of playing upon that, is like interested to know how you keep that tech startup mentality in a legacy space. And in particular, Jen, I'd love to start with you because we had a brief conversation about this around in regards to data and how traditionally it's been a very guarded aspect of the industry, very valuable. But you kind of talked about this theme of, how can we break through this? How can we not have this siloed data and how can we partner in ways to really make this valuable for our customers and the consumer? So I guess, the question would be around your thoughts on the future of data and partnerships in a legacy industry.
Yeah. So we think about it a lot, and there's the way the industry runs today, and there's a lot of reasons that it is the way it is. And part of what I think a lot about is how do we appreciate that, and then think about how we can honor those and address those where needed with modern technology, or if we can promote a change, where can we promote a change, and how do we take someone on that journey? So it's something that we've thought about from really early days. We were incredibly lucky with our first hire with someone who on the product side came from industry, and things that we did early on and we continue to do is think about how would Jen, who has a background in tech, think about this problem statement, sounding board that with Sandy in this case. This was the early pattern of what does the industry think? Where can we find common ground? Where do we think it's appropriate to challenge? And where is it not appropriate to challenge? Because it's actually really, really complicated. And sometimes you have to look at that and think about translating it, but it's not about changing it. So we think about that a lot of what is appropriate for us to push on right now, where can we push, and where can we just implement improvements for our customers. Data has been a really interesting one for us, and I imagine for everyone on this call, where it was very surprising to me how challenging it was to get good, consistent data throughout the ecosystem. And so, John nodded to this of you're filling something out multiple times. That means there's multiple instances of Jen in the industry. There's different intake processes with different levels of control. And so there's a massive opportunity that we think exists in this space of having folks partner to think about more consistent and stable data sources, especially around identity. It's a space that we're working on. We know that it'll mean a change for folks, and part of how you make that reasonable is there's an upside to that that makes it a valuable part of someone's workflow. And so I imagine, across the board, we've all seen opportunities with that in our business. But I'm quite excited to see what the next couple of years look like as different parts of the industry think about the value of exchanging data and having more transparent and accessible data sources. It's a passion of mine. I'd be curious to hear if John or Alexander have any thoughts on it.
A lot of the threads you're mentioning, we see and think about. I mean, the application thing that John was talking about, that is an order of magnitude more annoying in E&S and wholesale, because you go to the admitted market, you're an agent, and you take your handy person to the admitted market and you submit on their portal, which is at this point quite nicely designed, very automated, great to use, and it declines. And you try 2 more markets and you input the data into their portal again 2 more times, and you get 2 declines, and you're like, now I'm going to wholesale. And you email the wholesaler all the information you used on the admitted portals, and the wholesaler responds, they're like, please fill out the 3 attached PDFs. And so now you've got 40 pages of PDFs you're filling out. And they also probably want to fill out a cord too, because there's probably one market that wants that. And so that's a very real story that happens every day. And to Jen's point on data, there's a reason why in E&S, every risk needs to be underwritten a little differently. You're really truly underwriting the nature of operations of the business, just not the single class code. The rating matters in a different way. And so each of these organizations has a different model that's battle tested. It's profitable for their shareholders on how they underwrite this business. And the problem is just the process of getting the data into that system is absolutely convoluted. I hesitate to say broken, because it's there for a reason. There's incentives, there's market structure, but to what Jen is saying, it's incredibly siloed. And I probably have the same, I don't want to say biases, but I came from a world where it's all dynamic web applications, everything's in a database. Digital partnerships are a very mature part of the ecosystem. Passing data back and forth is not something you do in Excel spreadsheets. It's first principles. We get there through using APIs or other data transfer mechanisms. And it's not to say that the industry is moving in that direction. The commercial insurance industry is just not quite there yet. And the power structures at some of the companies aren't quite there yet either. So point being, this is also a passion of mine, I guess, is where I'm going with this. And we think about this a lot internally too.
Yeah, and I think these are all really good points with the rest of the panel. And just to add on, a couple things. One, in commercial P&C, it's interesting, or what I find interesting is that there are definitely alternative data sources, and there's things that we're using. At the same time, it may not be as robust as it is in some other lines, particularly as you get into more specialization. So at Vouch, we're using external data sources, but we also try to balance that with simple digital applications and getting that information from a client. To take an example, so we write other insurtechs, and we'll write their E&O. We'll write companies like Vouch that are providing insurance services, and the difference in exposure and rate and segmentation of a company that is handling claims themselves versus just selling insurance. I don't want to say just selling, but engaged in selling insurance. Those are completely different risks. The expense is going to be 5 to 10 times higher when you're managing claims directly. And that's an example where, and we run across all the time, I don't think we have great data sources for that other than to simply ask the client. And then it becomes about how do we do it efficiently, so we're only asking once and using that to feed any other applications or rating that we might need to use it for. So that's really, really important for us. And then the second point, and it's building on, I think, what Jen talked about, is it is important to also ask with data, what is it we need to honor about traditional insurance and what don't we need to honor? And we're asking ourselves those questions daily. When there are certain things about data and getting that data in underwriting and pricing risks that are really important, but there's a lot, as I mentioned, when you have 4 laptops, I don't need to know your roof type or construction type. So let's just get rid of that. And so I guess the other flip side of this is, I guess where I'm headed with this is it's important not to underestimate the importance of just getting rid of data you don't really need and not asking for it and not trying to pursue it when it doesn't ultimately matter.
That's a really fascinating point. And I think I'm going to skip ahead to, I think, a question that might better tie into the conversation direction right now is, it seems, and a lot of you guys had mentioned it early on, that kind of the first wave of InsurTech was really focused on the customer experience and really kind of that buying process, speeding up that buying process. I guess my question is, where do you see the next evolution that InsurTech is going to bring? While the customer experience will always be important, is it, leveraging these new streams of data, putting together new products and leveraging emerging technologies that will actually start changing perhaps like how you guys come up with risk and value risk?
I'm happy to jump in on this.
Yeah, please,
this is
John.
One that we've talked about a ton, and so totally agree. First wave of InsurTech made tremendous advancements in the UX and just making the application process really easy for the end client, and a lot of great work that went into that. My personal philosophy is that the next wave of successful InsurTechs are going to be the one that figure out how to bring together the concentric circles of technology, user experience, and insurance product design. So I won't throw out specific names, but make no mistake, the first wave of InsurTech, great front-end user experience. I can go pull examples. Many of them were using a bot policy that is virtually unchanged from the 1960s. And it's important that we also think about how do we change the actual insurance product to fit digital distribution and make it easier for the end client. And there's lots of ways that we're doing that. There's a lot more that we have on our roadmap, but I think really thinking about how those 3 things overlap and come together is going to be one of the keys to success for this next wave of InsurTechs.
Amazing. Alex, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that, sorry, all my answers are informed by sort of the E&S nature of our business, which for those that don't know, insurance is like, that's the place where the harder business goes, or the stuff that the regular carriers don't want to write. And it's set up as a insurance market in the US with less regulation to allow for more nimble pricing and product development to write those things that the Hartford Travelers Chubb are declining. And that is a really interesting feature of the insurance market. It's also probably the most esoteric relative to the rest of the American insurance ecosystem, I'd say. And so point being is the first wave was definitely about like customer experience and digitally integrated experiences. Like I kind of think we're on the vanguard of that in E&S. Like we haven't finished that problem set in the E&S industry. Now, our clients are agents themselves. It's a heavily intermediated business. So it's a much different product paradigm than just putting an application online. It's way more process driven, handling matters around binding and issuance and renewals are a much more important part of the process. They're part of every insurance process. So I think I don't have a great answer for you on what's next, because we're kind of just working with what's in front of us, but maybe that's a structural viewpoint limitation on our side. I would say, just to echo what John is saying, that the reason I personally really like working in E&S is because this structure allows us to work really deeply with a set of carriers. So we're digitizing an appetite quilt to make a really easy to use storefront for agents to get to E&S. I don't have insurance product design expertise. We have insurance experts on our team, but they're also not insurance product managers. We partner with the carriers we work with to figure out, and they have massive appetite to get their products digitally distributed. They just need trading partners to do it as such. And so we get to spend a lot of time, and these are products that they're doing dozens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of premium on through paper. And they're just trying to say, hey, how do we get this a little bit more digital? Because they buy into the client experience too. And to John's point, it's because it's E&S, they're also innovating on that product quite rapidly. So it's an interesting, it's like the more academically interesting part of insurance too, because you're really seeing how the underwriters think about risk and exposure on a high velocity basis. So no clear answer on what's next, but there's a lot to be done on user experience, particularly in some of the more complex commercial lines too, I'd say.
Thanks. And Jen, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
So I think we're, and because we are, back office application, not in the production of insurance, for us, we came along, I guess that first wave was coming through to help support companies in that space to do some of the back office work in a different way. I'd probably agree that we're kind of tiptoeing towards what I would think about as a second wave, which is there are a bunch of folks in the space right now that are doing more point work of, I'm going to tackle this specific part of the workflow. I'm going to try to improve this specific part. And one thing that we realized really early on, we were the same way, right? We were like, oh, we're going to do insurance regulatory compliance. We're going to be very specific about that. We realized there was a bigger problem around managing the workflow and visibility into the workflow. And then right now we're thinking a lot about what does it mean to be a platform in this space that empowers a workflow end-to-end in partnership with other technologies in this space, so that we can partner with Vouch and with Pathpoint and with anyone in the space. Because I have this kind of problem I want to solve. What are the suite of tools that I can use? There's a lot of catch up. There's some very great innovation in the space where people are doing point to point in their own surface area, but the experience of an agent, we all know and we've talked about, is to engage with multiple entities, often multiple times a day while you're pursuing a policy or going through a specific workflow. And so there's really interesting opportunity in this space in this next wave, I'd say, for the back office to start to think with folks who are challenging what this experience should look like for an agent in terms of getting a policy, also challenging what does it look like to onboard, what does it look like to manage, and there's some great ideas, but there isn't quite a formal, like, how are we going to do this yet? And that's what we are spending a lot of our time thinking about, is where do we want to play in that next push, where we see that there are other people who are innovating across the board. Can we tell a story together about what a modern experience could look like? And that can support someone who's new in the space, someone who's in the second wave of insurtech, or an incumbent who wants to change their existing processes to match the demands of the market. And it's an interesting place. I would say we're like right on the edge of that, and something for the next year. But there aren't a ton of us in the insurance back office productizing it, and so I'm really excited to see, as more insurtechs come along and think about these problem statements, what that means for our area as well.
Thank you for that. And Alex, I wanted to hit a little bit, you had mentioned around distribution. I'd love to spend a little bit of time about how you're thinking about distribution, specifically around customer acquisition costs that can, like traditional means, can be typically pretty high. So, as you're thinking of these new waves and new products, are you thinking of new creative ways to kind of outside those paid traditional acquisition channels? Are you to think of new creative ways to effectively reach new markets?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and a deeply important one to a lot of insurance production businesses, certainly. First of all, and I can't take credit for this decision, other folks at the company made a very intentional decision to position ourselves as a wholesale brokerage. We distribute through independent agents, so we're not and people do this great, Vouch being one of them, but there's dozens of other companies. We don't have to figure out how to market directly to the insureds. We rely on third-party salespeople to do that in that realm. Now, we still got to market and convince these 30,000 independent insurance agencies to try a new wholesaler. And again, this is the stuff they don't want to screw up. They don't do every day. So it's in some ways the scariest part of their business to bring to a new entrant. To your question on interesting things, we've been very lucky, and this is a timing thing, that because commercial insurance has digitized or is digitizing, it's a foregone conclusion to me at this point, and it's going to be self-service, it's going to be technology driven. But because that's happened, there's all these platforms, quoting or placement platforms, but also digital agencies that do have relationships or operations of acquiring businesses, and they've gone through all their admitted book, their bot book, and their workers' comp book, and they've digitized it. And now they're getting to that E&S stuff, and they're realizing they need, the same way our carriers need digital trading partners, the digital platforms out there that are the backbone of digitization in the industry are they're looking for wholesale trading partners to access. And so we've been fortunate enough to, again, because we're sort of half technology company, half insurance company, our architecture is API driven, and we were able to spin up partnerships to do proofs of concept quite well to figure out how we deliver our product in their environment, or parts of our product offering in their environment. And that's been a great way to start acquiring new clients through those types of partnerships. And I don't know if it's particularly innovative, but it's definitely it speaks to this wave of insurtechs. Like, they're eager to do this because they're saying, well, 75% of my business is placed digitally, and then I use email for this other wholesale stuff, and you're telling me that you could do some of it on the internet. And we're like, I think so. Let's try and figure it out, type thing. And it's, of course, matured from there, but that's one thing that's worked for us. And I wouldn't say that that's unique to Pathpoint. That's a tried and true partnership strategy in insurance, which makes it kind of quite an interesting market too.
Right. Yeah, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts, with your experience in the industry, around distribution and finding new markets, and maybe more creative ways that haven't been looked at before.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts on this, and sorry, this might be a little bit meandering. Vouch is a direct provider. So we're not working through independent agents, brokers. We have our own sales team, licensed agents that answer questions for clients. We obviously have a number that are coming straight through, and binding insurance all through the digital experience. But for those that have questions, they can go to our agents. So, with that said up front, couple things I observe that I'm just throwing them out there as interesting observations. I'm not sure how they're going to play out and what it ultimately means in the long run. But two things that are interesting. One, and this is not a new thing, but I hear it talked about more and more, which is, how do agents and brokers become much more efficient with the small stuff? They will tell you behind closed doors, not in front of clients, that it's a money loser for them to work with a client that's generating 1,000 or even 2,000 of total premium. And there's different ways they can solve for that, but many brokers, large brokers that I talk to, of the top three, will tell you their structure just isn't built to be able to handle the small business clients. And so I'm not sure where that goes. I'm more sharing an observation. And then the other is, and I was just reading an article on this morning, the consolidation of power with the largest brokers out there, I think, does continue to grow. If you look at the market cap of the largest 5 brokers, it is catching up, or in some instances, surpassing the largest carriers that are out there. And so I share that observation because the largest brokers, are growing in terms of their overall value. And, I think that is coming purely through scale and purchasing power, ability to leverage some of the carriers out there. Just my hypothesis, but it seems that some of the largest carriers, I guess, saying it directly, I'm not sure they're making tons of advancements in the small or even mid-sized space and becoming more efficient and getting the clients more of what they need. I don't think they are. I think they're just doing it through pure purchasing power and scale that they gain in the market. So nothing profound there, I suppose, but just a couple dynamics that I continue to watch, and I think will probably play out in the coming years and have impact on how we operate.
Yeah, Jen, I'm curious, as kind of back office outsider looking in, almost, are a lot of these things that John mentioned what you're seeing with the different organizations that you're working with, especially the successful ones?
Yeah, I think I'll say for us, what we've been thinking a lot about and watching some of the same things that you're looking at, John, is that we're just appreciating that there's going to be some pretty big shifts that aren't straightforward to predict in terms of how people engage with these processes, specifically agents up and down the stack. And part of this I've talked about in some other talks where there was this idea of, oh, the agent is going away, and we were very clearly opinionated that that's not going to happen. But there are going to be points, like John is saying, where there isn't a valuable flow for them to be as hands-on. And as the industry gets its hands on more technology and starts to think about different structures, there's going to be an opportunity for tools and applications in that space to support those diversification of workflows, or maybe consolidation of how you approach different parts of the market. And so that's what we think a lot about here is, what are our customers thinking about and seeing, and why do they want to automate? Is it, because they're not seeing the value in a certain set of activities in a certain space? Who's going to come in and fill that space? Maybe not who, but a series of who's, or what is the new mode going to be? And it's a really exciting time for that. One thing that we think a lot about here is not being overly opinionated. I'll say Alex and John are in the forefront of thinking about what's going to change. And we're thinking a lot about how do we support those changes in an effective way across multiple entities where possible. So there's a lot to come there, but I think about it more as like it's a great space to see how people are testing things. Some things are going to work, some things are not going to work, and watching that is pretty fascinating.
To put it, what I think the way Jen's thinking about it is really interesting. An example came to mind, like in the wholesale space, it's traditionally very regional, at least the sort of delegated authority business, which we do. I won't get into the jargon, but so point being is you'd have a wholesaler in a region that really knew how to underwrite construction businesses in that region. They'd also really be acutely aware of what carriers wrote, what the compliance requirements were with state regulators, but the scale of the scale by which the insurtechs want to operate at, it sort of necessitates a national footprint, and we're guilty / fortunate of the same thing, right? And what that changes is your back office systems and operational systems have to be tuned a lot. The audit trail of them, the way they're monitored, the way they're deployed is a more complex space because you're doing it across different regions and different states. And so you can do all these things in a spreadsheet for one state, you can get it up to 10 states, but at some point to do it to have the data unsiloed, to have this paper trail, the needs of the people in the market, us in particular, are going to be served by different tools, AgentSync being one of them, but there's quite a few others, I think. Sorry, just hopefully that adds some color to Jen's point.
Yeah, no, that's great. I
was going to say on that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please, Jen.
That point, because Alex, you made me think about this. Something that we think a lot about is how to demystify some of this. One thing that I appreciated coming in was that you have people, and you just highlighted it with regional, who have really deep, embedded, incredibly valuable knowledge. And it can make it quite difficult for someone who wants to do this at scale to address a workflow in the right way. So we think about this with the states. There's 50 states and some territories that we participate with, and they approach different limited lines, different aspects differently. And when we had to extend our model to support surplus, it was quite complex. Now, the reality is, if we can take that complexity and build it into an application, then someone else can be successful in that space without having to have that deeply embedded knowledge. And that will help support some new and different models of distribution that I'm not gonna be able to describe to you. Someone else on this call maybe will invent or describe, but it's quite neat when you start to think about unpacking not just data, but also knowledge about, what are these underpinning drivers? And I think John said this earlier, there's complexity that's there for a reason. Some we need to retain and some we can maybe evolve past. And for what we want to retain, how do we make that more accessible to more people, so that they can create models that are more leveraged and more scaling, which is pretty neat. Also some really complicated edge cases within some states. So a lot of good engineering brains in my org tackling those, but quite fun to unpack.
Kentucky taxes commercial insurance at the city level, which would be sort of a canonical edge case example of the stuff that John, Jen, and I are all dealing with, or trying to deal with, I should say.
Yeah, I would. And just to extend this, going back to an earlier question, Patrick, on technology and how that gets used. One thing I didn't mention, but we do spend a fair amount of time actually thinking about, and I don't often talk about it much, just because it's not necessarily client facing, but the ability to use technology to manage that complexity is huge. And I think the next wave of insurtechs and those who can figure that out will be extraordinarily benefited, and that benefit will ultimately benefit the clients. But great examples here. There's so many edge cases, and every time you have to bring an engineer in to program something to address one of these edge cases, it's very costly. And so if you can think about developing systems where engineers don't have to come in and program that edge case, but an administrator of the system can do it, that has tremendous value. And that's something we're actually working on at Vouch and have made progress on with pricing and some other services oriented architecture. More to come on that, but I just think managing complexity is something we will hear more and more about. Maybe not in those exact words, but it's helpful.
Everybody's building a rules engine. We're all building a rules engine somewhere in our stack.
I mean, John just hit the existential product engineering question on the head. Like, you can handle it systematically, but you're asking your engineers to adjust what they were working on to handle this edge case that the operations team is now bottlenecked on, or our sales team is bottlenecked on. And that's a tough decision. Or you can say, well, we'll do it manually. And that's okay to do, but then you end up, again, it's not that we're trying to take humans out of it, but then the expertise is just in someone's head, or it's done in a very ad hoc and unsystematic way. And so neither is right or wrong, but you have to strike this like internal culture that's also very client driven to have really good intuition on when to treat it systematically or when to treat it manually, which I think is what John is talking about. How about you reduce complexity? And it's interesting to hear him think about it, because it is an architecture problem too, I think, and I'm sure agents think so. But to Jen's point, it's all about rules engines and when you delegate to a person versus the machine, and it's all the same in the end, I think.
Kind of expanding on some of these thoughts, and not maybe looking so forward thinking, but maybe a little bit back, that might be interesting for some of our attendees, especially some new to the industry. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, kind of back to my first question, with that tech mentality of dealing with kind of traditional legacy insurance industries and that corporation versus kind of the leaner, nimble. So maybe around, love to hear any great stories, but any advice around, and Alex, I'll start with you, working with carriers, working with some of these more traditional corporations where communication might not always be the easiest. just some of your thoughts on and maybe advice to people new to the insurtech space.
Go find a partner who's got experience working with carriers and convince them to be your co-founder.
Great advice.
And don't balk at the sticker price. Figure out how to get aligned on the vision of what you want to do, and recognize you're saving years of time by bringing in someone that knows how to work with carriers. Now, you want to bring someone in that appreciates and loves technology too. So it's not a silver bullet, but that's what I'd say. I could also write a 400-page book on how to work with the NS carriers. So
and John, you know, having experience on both sides of it, insurtech and traditional carriers, you know, kind of advice to people new to the insurtech space, dealing with some of those legacy industries and more corporation mentality, to be kind about it.
Yeah, I think two things. One, I would 100% agree with Alex, you know, and find that person who also has the ability to think creatively and know where you can push and perhaps where it's going to be really difficult to push. So, but you don't want somebody who's going to come in and say, well, I'm going to build it the way we built it at the other carrier. They know their expertise is such that they can say, hey, I'm going to take this 20% from the traditional approach, but 80% of it's going to be brand new. So the short version is 100% agree with Alex on that. I do think getting that expertise is helpful and important. Just make sure you've got somebody who's creative and can flex their thinking. The flip side, actually, same would go for product. You know, somebody who comes from a pure SaaS background and is going to do it exactly the way it's done at a SaaS company, that's not going to work either. So it's a two-way street there. You got to have both sides come together and be thinking creatively and flexibly. So the last thing I'll say on this, and this took me longer than I like to admit to figure out, but when you come together and some of those individuals from traditional insurance, they probably have some agile experience, but probably have been more exposed to a waterfall approach on things. Obviously, you want to do things whenever possible in an agile fashion. What took me a while to realize is that the differences were less about an agile approach and whether or not it made sense when you take the traditional insurance person and perhaps the traditional SaaS person. Well, the main difference is I've gone through this a number of times and seen friction in that process. The main difference is usually the definition of what is an MVP. So my point with this is be clear on that. When you're working on something, spend time defining what is minimally needed to launch this product or solution. In the traditional insurance, the very extreme traditional insurance person will say, well, everything's got to be perfect. It's all got to be buttoned up, right? And at the other end of the spectrum, somebody who doesn't know what they don't know might say, well, let's just, I don't care if the forms are right or the rating's not right. Well, that doesn't work either. So long-winded way of saying spend time on defining the MVP. I think it helps avoid a lot of friction. That took me a while to figure out, but once I did, I think we're able to minimize a lot more friction in those discussions between engineers and traditional insurance.
Yeah, thanks. And Jen, I'm wondering if you have thoughts. I know you typically aren't dealing in the same manner that our other two panelists are with some of these legacy carriers, but
I mean, we are, though, in some ways, and something that I would echo both of those. You can't be successful in this space without someone on your team who has deep experience and that flexible mindset of passion to move it forward. But what I would say, one thing that we talk about a lot here is really leaning into your curiosity and discomfort around this stuff. If you take a hard line, either to John's point, a hard line on the tech side or a hard line on the insurance side, we're probably not going to get to the right answer for our customer. If you assume a customer is legacy and slow and they just don't know what they're doing, you're wrong. They know what they're doing. They're doing it that way for a variety of reasons. There are a bunch of constraints that also put them in that situation. So really working to be curious about what the customer is trying to solve, what is the underlying challenge, not casting judgment, are really just really important mental exercise, I think, for humans generally. But in this space in particular, it can be incredibly easy to mentally shortcut. Oh, I don't agree with that. It shouldn't work that way, or they're doing it wrong, or they're making it overly complicated. And that was a thing for me early on, to really be comfortable with the fact that, like, I was going to come up with a design, and then I was going to find out that the state of Georgia did it differently, and I was going to have to throw away part of that design. And I can be as frustrated as I want with the state of Georgia or the state of Colorado or whatever. But that's the reality, and that, you know, it's fluid and it's going to change. So a curiosity and a respect for the complexity of the space gives us the opportunity to, you know, do those challenge moments and move things forward in a respectful way. But if we don't have that, we're going to make missteps. And then I think the other thing on this is just patience, right? We kind of talk about here, it's not if, it's when. I really do believe, and we've seen this with a lot of our customers, there are an incredible number of people in this space who are passionate about improving it. And they're in the carriers. We say, oh, they move so slow, they move this out, and it's true, they do. But there will be champions kind of everywhere that you look, if you know how to look for them and support them. And so figuring out how to lift up those voices, and even if it takes, you know, 2 years or 3 years on a deal, that can be a huge win for that company and the industry if we can help people move through it. So I'd say curiosity and patience are kind of big ones in our world.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that's a good segue into our questions, ending on kind of those life lessons that you can take outside of the industry as well: curiosity and patience. So yeah, I think we'll move over to a couple questions that we have from the audience, and then we'll wrap things up and let you guys get back to your Mardi Gras celebrations or the rest of your business day. But first question that came in, what are the group's thoughts on the current management systems such as Epic and Vertafore, and how the landscape will change for independent agents as new technology competes with legacy systems? Any volunteers to go first?
This is a potentially hot one.
Yeah.
I can probably answer this, but the most benignly.
Maybe around just kind of in general around current management systems and maybe what you guys are looking for.
I think that, well, first of all, if you're starting in insurtech, I think you should really understand the agency management and probably the policy administration feature sets, like to Jen's point on curiosity, like really become product experts on what capabilities they're driving for enterprises and who the buyers are. And like, again, even if you're just starting an MGA, a tech MGA, I think these things just are the infrastructure of the market. On this one, I can speak, you know, Epic and Vertafore are everywhere. They're, I don't know off the top of my head, but probably more than 50% market share between the two of them, if not more than that. And they evolve by acquiring, at least that's conventional wisdom on them. And so they're great acquirers, and they can identify great businesses and great features that they should integrate. So I suspect that will continue to happen. And you know, I see this a lot in small commercial, where that is, to John's point, it's not something that most agencies want to go after because it can be unprofitable. So the ones that do it very well have a very particular take on it. Some of these AMSs have not delivered like the market access solutions or piece of those that small commercial necessitates. And that's a big opportunity for companies like Pathpoint, but many others. And we're not even in a management system. We're just offering access points. So I would say that these are very complex, huge pieces of software. They power a ton of the market. So it's hard to make general things. My general view is that they will innovate through acquisition. Many great companies do that. That's not a knock against them. And so I think keeping tabs on what they're doing there would be the best way to think about how they're serving their clients or what opportunities they're seeing.
Thanks for fielding that one. Any other thoughts from John or Jen?
I'll mention briefly. I mean, I think, and I have more experience in policy administration systems, less on agency management systems, although some involvement there. I think I don't. The age-old question is, do you build or buy? And I think the answer is it depends. So probably unsatisfying, but it really depends on what you're trying to do, what unique features you really need. What I can say is, based on several experiences or having gone through this, if you do build, having expertise and somebody who's been around a policy admin system or agency management system is important. And I think the three most likely mistakes people make when they try to build their own: one, they underappreciate the importance of the policy data taxonomy, and getting that right up front. Two, they don't understand the complexity of versioning and the fact that you need different versions by state, et cetera. And then the last is just the ability to make changes to policies and have all the necessary downstream impacts completed in an automated way. So I've seen this a couple of times. These mistakes almost always come up when you try to build it yourself. So the more you're out in front of those, the better.
Thanks for that. Last question, just kind of a brief last thought, and we'll let you guys get back to your day. Jen, maybe how you think about, especially in post-pandemic, building the culture and acquiring the talent in your startup and in technology, where maybe people won't be as attracted to insurance, right? So how do you put forward to like acquiring those talent and really for your industry and creating that culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually were talking about that in a welcome meeting yesterday with some new hires. Interestingly enough, what we found, and I'd be curious for Alex and John in this space as well, is that insurance, I think on the surface, you're sort of like, okay, insurance. And then the more you learn about it, there's so many interesting, challenging problems that if that's what gets you excited about, your brain ticking of solving something that is not straightforward and that is kind of at the edge of what you're going to push on, that's really going to challenge you, then insurance is a really exciting space to be in. And I'd say 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we were starting, it was more that first wave. So definitely did a lot of, okay, I said insurance. Before you run away, let me describe 3 or 4 really interesting problems. Like, does that problem interest you? Like, and so I did that a lot and still do, because I think they are very interesting problems. And there are plenty of folks who really want to go and solve those, amazingly talented product engineering and go to market, right? Of let's carve out a new space. We are a new player and in this space. And so to the question before, I think we're bringing more opportunity to people to make different decisions, which will also, I think make a more competitive landscape, which is exciting. So that's what I did. I am a big believer that, I was in fintech before this, like, if you're interested in how the world works and this thing that you've never inquired about, that is actually a really important part of your life, if you want to learn more about it, like, we're a great place to do that. And if you want to solve some problems that the industry has, like, we're a great place to do that as well. And if you want to run away at the name insurance, that's cool too. Eventually we might convince you it's a pretty neat place to be. But that's a lot of what we thought about, is making sure that we're really talking about the problems that are there that we have the ability to move forward on. And then just a culture of how do we think about problem solving here, and how do we think about your ability to drive impact were our big things. But I'm hoping that next year people will stop saying that insurance isn't neat and it's scary, and we can all just get on with, hey, we're solving a really cool infrastructure problem for a lot of the US, and then eventually someone is going to solve it for bigger parts of the world as well.
I think, like any good sales process, you need to have a qualification mechanism or disqualification mechanism. And what Jen is saying is true. Like, we want to work with people that are like really pragmatic problem solvers, curious, like they like learning about market structure, even if they're doing front end programming for landing page optimization. And as long as the trade-off there is that you're going to miss, a lot of people are not going to apply for your jobs if you project that type of culture. But if you're okay with that, then that's the way to get great technologists into insurance. I think InsurTech is a human capital arbitrage. I think that Pathpoint is a wholesale brokerage, which is the oldest of the old school type of insurance entities. But because half our DNA is technology and half our DNA is insurance, we can pick the best technologists to hire, and we can pick the best specialty insurance experts to hire. And that is, if you get really like macro on Pathpoint, like that's the one thing that makes us different from all the other large wholesalers, is that human capital opportunity. And that's not, lots of other insurtechs have that opportunity. AgentSync and Vouch both have that in their sectors with compliance software and professional liability insurance. And so I think that no point other than that, there is a real atomic advantage to being an insurtech. It's incredibly hard to start from scratch, but you can layer that into recruiting advantages too.
Amazing. And John, final thoughts?
I think really well said by the other panelists here. So yeah, I mean, market right now is tougher, probably tougher than I've maybe ever seen when it comes to hiring. But you know, the thing I'll add, and just I think adding on to Jen's comments, is it is interesting when we bring in particularly engineers, even somewhere on the fence, like, oh, I don't know, I really never thought about insurance. 9 times out of 10, 6 months in, they're ecstatic. They're loving it, and they love the complexity of the problems that they get to solve. So yeah, the more we can do, and I don't think we have a silver bullet at Vouch on this, but the more we can do to really articulate that and get that message out that this is fun, exciting, challenging work with really complex problems, I think that we'll all be better off in the space.
Yeah, amazing. And I can just say from personal experience working with many of your teams, the passion, it's clear, even over like video or calls. The passion's there, and the problem solving is there. So it's been a pleasure working with your teams. We're honored